Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a fascinating and intensely complex framework that's pulled directly from a deeply researched set of source materials. We're going to be exploring a full investigative case file, one that bridges biblical cosmology, the modern UFO disclosure movement, and the personal forensic research of investigator Amy Beedle, right alongside some heavy theological insights. It's a framework that completely challenges standard conventions and honestly reframes human history as we know it.
Okay, so let's dive right in with a massive paradigm shift. What if the modern alien disclosure movement, all this mainstream talk of UFOs and non-human intelligence, what if it isn't a scientific breakthrough at all? The authors propose a radically different lens here. They suggest that this is actually an ancient, carefully orchestrated spiritual deception that's just being rebranded for a modern, secular audience. Now, the source material points out a really interesting cultural reality check. Notice this huge dichotomy. These sci-fi encounters with, say, gray aliens, they rarely, if ever, target grounded inner-city communities. And why is that? Well, as this quote highlights, those communities already recognize these anomalies, but they don't see them as advanced interstellar visitors. They see them as familiar spiritual manifestations. They've understood the reality of localized spiritual warfare for a very long time. To really grasp the whole picture, the authors have mapped out 6 key areas for us today. First, the modern disclosure deception. Second, mapping the celestial realm. Third, the cosmological timeline. Fourth, the true origin of demons. Fifth, healing the hijacked soul. And finally, enforcing the decommission. Let's start right off with Section 1, the modern disclosure deception. The authors basically argue that secular society is arriving incredibly late to the party. While the internet is just buzzing with algorithmic trends about alien abductions, grounded faith communities have understood for millennia that humanity has literally never been alone on this planet. To them, any upcoming cosmic disclosure isn't going to cause some massive crisis of faith because they already view these modern UFO encounters through that established lens of ancient spiritual warfare. It's nothing new. Moving right along to Section 2, mapping the celestial realm. So to accurately analyze these non-human intelligences, the source material establishes a really strict taxonomy, and it heavily references biblical texts like Colossians chapter 1. Here's the key. Extraterrestrial and interdimensional are absolutely not interchangeable terms. Extraterrestrial beings are categorized as physical entities from outside Earth that can actually interact with matter. Think of the angels in Genesis 18 who literally sat down and ate a physical meal of meat and milk with Abraham. Interdimensional creatures, on the other hand, like those multi-eyed beings in Revelation 4, operate purely in the invisible spiritual plane, completely outside of our human sensory constraints. That brings us to Section 3, the cosmological timeline. You might be wondering, how did all these entities get involved with Earth in the first place? To grasp that, the text outlines a timeline that identifies 2 entirely separate falls. First, you have Age 1, which is the initial unified creation. Then, Age 2 brings Lucifer's first rebellion, a cosmic, geopolitical coup that resulted in an expulsion to Earth. But then, much later in Age 4, long after humanity is created, a completely different second rebellion occurs. A specific class of angels called the Watchers actually abandon their celestial posts and descend to Mount Hermon. And their specific goal? To illicitly hybridize with human women. But this second rebellion didn't just produce offspring. The text asserts it triggered an entire Anokeian information age. These fallen entities basically traded forbidden celestial knowledge with human families, specifically Cain's lineage. The sources link this directly to 3 guys: Jabal, who established commerce; Jubal, who mastered frequency and media; and Tubal-Cain, who invented metallurgy and advanced warfare. The authors make the case that these 3 pillars still control our globe today. Plus, they argue that this traded knowledge of frequency and magnetism is exactly how those massive, ancient megalithic grids and pyramids were built all over the world. Now, about that illicit hybridization, it produced the Nephilim, what we often refer to as giants. And the source fiercely deconstructs those secular theories that try to explain away biblical giants as just regular people suffering from medical pituitary gigantism. Medical gigantism actually causes severe physical frailty, joint degradation, and really short lifespans. But the post-flood Nephilim variants, like Goliath, they were elite, highly mobile warriors who could wield hundreds of pounds of bronze armor in active combat. Because of this, the authors frame the biblical conquest of Canaan not as some arbitrary war, but as a highly targeted genetic cleanup operation to preserve the human genome. Let's dive into Section 4, The true origin of demons. So, what exactly happened to the spirits of those hybrid Nephilim when their physical bodies were destroyed? Well, our sources completely redefine our modern understanding of demonic entities. The text argues that the term unclean spirit isn't just a metaphor for being morally dirty. Actually, it's a strict legal status. It means a decommissioned entity. Because these hybrid Nephilim were unauthorized creations born totally outside of heaven's registry, when they died, their spirits literally had nowhere to go. They were stripped of their physical housing, unfit for any celestial service, and basically left to wander the earth in a permanent state of limbo.
And understanding this comparison is absolutely crucial to the whole framework. Fallen angels and demons, not the same thing. Fallen angels, the ones from Lucifer's first rebellion, they already have celestial bodies. They aren't out here trying to possess random people. They're focused on high-level systemic deception and geopolitical manipulation from cosmic thrones. Demons, on the other hand, are those disembodied Nephilim spirits. Because they once lived in physical bodies, they are desperately craving a human biological host. They just want to possess a nervous system so they can feel physical sensations again, things like eating, drinking, or experiencing lust.
The author perfectly illustrates this operational mechanic using the biblical story of Legion from Mark chapter 5. When confronted, this massive military cohort of disembodied demons literally begged to be sent into a herd of 2,000 pigs rather than be thrown into the abyss. Why? Because they're so desperate for a physical vehicle, they'll even settle for possessing animals just to enact physical destruction. And once those pigs drowned and the physical bodies died, those decommissioned spirits were simply released right back into the atmosphere to look for a new host. Which leads us to Section 5. Healing the hijacked soul. Okay, so how does all this ancient macrocosmic history actually connect to modern wellness and our own personal psychology? This is where the forensic research of Amy Beedle comes into play. Acting in a persona she calls the wounded healer, Beedle uses her applied psychology degree as a literal Trojan horse to investigate modern clinical labels and New Age practices. She analyzed her own past certifications in Aura and Raw energy healing, and she identified them not as helpful wellness modalities, but as outright deceptions. In her logs, she points to modern phenomena like Mothman cryptid sightings, or even those soft-tone auditory anomalies you hear in headphones, as physical masks and interference patterns for this exact demonic activity. According to Beedle's highly detailed manuscript, the enemy has zero original power, right? So he steals and twists God's original designs. The text contrasts what it calls God's organic alchemy, which is the perfect original design of the human body and nervous system, with New Age practices like opening your chakras. Beedle's research concludes that chakras are actually demonic inversions. Think of them as artificial, inorganic software ports. When you open them, you're effectively lowering your spiritual firewall, which allows those decommissioned, disembodied entities we just talked about to siphon your energy and basically invite themselves in. Finally, we reach Section 6, enforcing the decommission. So if the human soul is being hijacked by these entities, how do you reclaim it? The source material concludes with a highly structured legal and spiritual protocol. It lays out 4 actionable steps to permanent freedom. And I want you to notice the language used here. It frames deliverance not as some mystical, chaotic test of strength, but as a strict judicial procedure. Step 1 is authentic spiritual regeneration. Step 2 requires the repentance and renunciation of any open legal rights. Essentially, you're shutting down those artificial ports. Step 3 is the active enforcement. Remember, you aren't fighting a peer here. You are serving a legal eviction notice against a decommissioned spirit that has zero authorized right to be in your biological temple. And lastly, Step 4 emphasizes strategic alignment with accountable, verified ministries so you can maintain that freedom. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, everything from cosmic rebellions and ancient megaliths, all the way down to the human nervous system and the true nature of the modern disclosure movement. I want to end this explainer with a really provocative question directly inspired by the authors. If these spiritual legal mechanics are actively operating behind the scenes of our modern world and inside our wellness practices, based on this framework, who or what might be living rent-free in your life right now? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us as we unpacked this incredible case file.